Let's get into the news. Okay, it has been a great week for Canada and for the freedom-loving world. We have a number of different stories today. Let's go ahead and start with Canada. So Ford, this is the Ontario Premier, he held a press conference recently where he announced that the province is now positioned to remove almost all COOF restrictions. And this was coming on the heels of him declaring a state of emergency in Ontario. Real quick on this one was kind of received sort of with mixed reception, let's say, by the kind of like the public at large, those who really support the protests, because it's almost kind of a half-hearted measure. First we have here, almost all restrictions, in his words, not all of them. And then there's no timeline yet. So, they claim to be working on a timeline to actually ease these restrictions. They're working on a plan, a plan for the plan for the plan, right? So kind of a half-hearted measure, even though, the scope of it does include the vaccination pass. The state of emergency really came emphatically saying on Friday, you guys need to, go home, right? And this is very much echoed by Justin Trudeau. So this speech is kind of a half-hearted measure. He seems to be taking a strong stance against the truckers, but at the same time saying, hey, we're going to ease up. We get it. I urge you, it's time to leave. Do so peacefully. There will be consequences if you don't leave, and those consequences will be severe. And then he's hitting them with fines if they don't comply, right? So you have a maximum penalty of $100,000 and up to a year in prison if you don't comply. So he's taking this halfway approach, right? Easing up on the mandates, but not all the way, and telling them to get the heck out of there before he cracks down. A lot of stuff happened earlier in the week to lead up to this point, though. So if we go back, we started off with the almost the Gestapo, Ottawa police starting to steal fuel from the truckers. This was seen by some legal minds as almost like let's say like a human rights violation potentially. If they use that for warmth and basically basic survival, especially amid freezing temperatures. We had a really interesting development happen that I think went just widely undiscussed, which was there was a story earlier this week around this Antifa member who basically ran over some truckers. Right. And this was a crazy story because this didn't make the airwaves hardly at all. But I thought it was worth to mention, for the very first act of violence that I'm aware of to come out of the trucker movement, you would think it's going to be, if you're just a mainstream media consumer, that the truckers will be the first to commit some act of violence, to go around doing some bigotry and some hatred and aggression. No, actually, it came from the left. And crazy enough, from an actual Antifa member. So he's now been charged in this attack on the truckers in Canada. Had it been the other way around, had some truckers, rammed a car through some counter protesters or through the, Ottawa police, crowd. I imagine that the public outcry would have been severe. You would have heard about it on CNN and MSNBC and all these different places. And it would have been, validation for Justin Trudeau and his team, right? That, the truckers are the bad guys. But that didn't happen, right? When Antifa is the actual assailant. So tragic situation here. I don't think the victim died, thankfully. But it gets more interesting. I mean, just an explosive week this past week. We had the Ottawa Police Chief Sergeant resign earlier this week over Freedom Convoy mishandling. And it's really interesting because he actually says here, according to the National Telegraph, it was likely over a disagreement with the city's philosophy towards the Freedom Convoy. It's interesting because around the same time, we had this interesting development with Justin Trudeau's sort of, Secret Service variety, if you would. So we have this corporate Bullford resigns from his position of personal security for Justin Trudeau. And he says, I have drawn my line in the sand. No more silence and compliance for me. But he was actually a sniper for Justin Trudeau. So, skilled marksman, right? But he's out of there. he resigned in good conscience. He was not fired. I think he respectfully resigned. And there's an interesting situation. So it hasn't been super easy for the truckers this week. They've had some setbacks, and two of them are legal in nature. And so we've had a Canadian judge who basically froze access to donations for the trucker convoy. And so we'll get to the amount later on in this video. I think it's over 9 million now, which is just insane. But they're basically putting in this judge. He's basically saying, look, this Give and Go website cannot give money to the truckers. And so I don't know what's going to happen with that. I don't know how that's going to play out, what workarounds are in place. But they're trying to shut off the well at its source here. And so that's not good. And so we have here the government officials in Ontario asked the court to stop organizers from accessing and doling out those funds. And the request was granted on Thursday. So, very interesting stuff. That's not a good sign, not a good move. It gives the onus more on the government to be able to kind of say you're breaking a law, right? You're breaking a court order. You're in violation of that. So therefore, we can arrest you. Their enthusiasm still seems really, really high. Like I said, they have over $9 million raised. But this is sort of an interesting obstacle for them to confront. I do know that Give and Go has been pretty adamant on Twitter around, hey, we're going to continue doing our job. In the meantime, we have some interesting little smaller flames happening, right? So Canada is a bushfire, right? But there's some smaller little maybe lighters or little campfires going on here in other parts of the world. So I wanted to highlight two. So we have one in Brussels, and then also in Paris, in France. And so there's been some attempts over this past couple of days to try to really replicate the Freedom Convoy movement in Canada. So far, they seem to have been, kind of unsuccessful, snipped in the bud. Europe is, somewhat prepared, you might say, right, to actually react to this and to, kind of put the right obstacles in place. So that has not happened yet. But interesting to kind of at least see the attempt here, and we'll see if they continue the movement or at least try to replicate it to some degree, maybe at a larger scale in these two countries. And then there was an interesting development on Friday. So Justin Trudeau, he met with our senior citizen in the White House, Mr. Biden, and then gave a speech later on Friday, basically saying, look, everything is on the table to ending these blockades, including military force. And there was some mixed reporting about that. But if you look at the actual quote or sort of kind of the transcript, he does actually say, that everything is on the table. But the armed forces or the military is basically a method of last resort. If you look at the actual transcript, so they the actual language is, we don't want to actually do that right now. Here's the quote. Canada remains a long way, right, from that rarely taken step of calling in the Canadian Armed Forces, but that does not mean that it's off the table. This is going to be an interesting week. Maybe what does a long way mean in Trudeau's terms? Is that a few weeks, a few months, a few days, right? You never really know with these people because they're not true to their word oftentimes, right? So pretty firing and sort of condemning speech. And then the onus has been over the weekend to really crack down on these truckers. And so you may have heard their biggest sort of let's say war front or battlefront has been the Ambassador Bridge, which is between Canada and Detroit. And so a judge granted an injunction to end that blockade. And so coming on the heels of the Trudeau speech, coming on the heels of Ontario and the premier there declaring a state of emergency, and then coming on the heels of this judge, granting the order or to actually end the blockade, they've been moving in basically between Friday and today. I'm recording this on a Sunday to actually shut this thing down. And sort of initially on Friday, there wasn't much movement. because the truckers were standing strong. I mean, look at this freedom. I mean, the the outfits kind of speak for themselves here. Canadian flags all over the place. Taking the moral high ground. And when you're fighting for the right cause, when you're on the side of righteousness, you have no reason to apologize, and you have no reason to stand down. When you're sure that you're right, and that morality is on your side, and that you have the moral high ground, these people have no reason to stand down. There's a saying back in the civil rights movement, an unjust law is really no law at all. Just because a court or a piece of paper says something doesn't make it right. And these people know that they're on the side of freedom, which is the right side, right? And I think they'll win the long game through this very effective strategy if they keep it up. And then we have this here. This is kind of like maybe more, let's say, breaking within the past couple of hours here. So the police seem to have been successful in clearing up the Ambassador Bridge. They made, some odd 12 arrests. So it looks like, could be wrong, we'll see what happens tonight, but it looks like this thing is coming to an end. This Ambassador Bridge, which has been their by far biggest kind of most high profile blockade, to the tune of millions and millions, if not billions of dollars in economic impact at this point, and getting really international attention. And it was, there were some beautiful pics in the midst of this. You had folks. I think veterans were coming out. Canadian veterans were coming out, standing with the protesters. Forming a line against these, police Gestapo out here abusing the elderly and doing what they're told. Right, they're oath breakers. It's not what they signed up for, but it is what they're told to do, and they'll follow what they were told to do to the very end. So looks like this may be sort of done. We'll see how the next couple of days develop, if they continue, even despite this order. And then going back to the actual Freedom Convoy itself. So as of this recording, we are now at about 9.3 million. So there you go. The reason that this is remarkable is that this is about the same amount that they had on GoFundMe, right, the other week. So now they're back to where they started in terms of money. How are they going to distribute that? Will it get to the truckers? Will it continue to fuel the movement? All that remains to be seen, right, in the midst of these court orders and such. But interesting development nonetheless. And still their goal is to reach 16 million. So good stuff. They are fighting the good fight. They are on the side of righteousness. What they stand for and are advocating for is good, just, and true. And I think if they keep it up, they will win the long game. Listen, this is a war. And you don't win through guns and arrows. You win through I think two things: taking the moral high ground, which they are, and publicly and demonstrably showing through civil disobedience that they are on the right side of history. So all that is the moral high ground. And then it's combating in the information space, right? So this is too high profile for folks to ignore, right? And so it's going to get the attention of normies and make people pay attention. And the battle is always for the normies. And speaking of the normies, so Heather McDonald here, we have to talk about this second story, moving on from Canada for a bit. So this is, a female comedian. She collapsed on stage, right, this past week. And this was live, right, in the middle of her bit. She falls backwards, falls backwards, and then cracks her skull, or fractures her skull on the floor. Not a joke. This is actual reality. And, I thought it was interesting to cover this because, this person was fully, vaccinated, fully boosted, I think 2 Pfizer, 1 Moderna, if I recall. And it's interesting because we have to talk about this ask questions part, because for me, this is almost like a perfect case study in like what's happening with the left and what will probably continue to happen over time. Because we've seen some interesting developments this past week, right? Where, you have Pfizer trying to, let's say, slow play the release of the data around their how their vaccine was approved by the FDA, slow playing the rollout to little kids, to children, pending better data. You have the Moderna CEO like basically selling all his stock this past week. You may have heard, and then resigning, or excuse me, he quit Twitter. And just disappeared off the internet. So kind of this interesting story where, like, as these states are opening up right now, I think that there's an interesting like shift where people are increasingly asking, like, where's the data to support these decisions, right? We're opening up. You have people getting fed up with the mandates, including the truckers in Canada, and you have semi-normies, I'll say, for Heather McDonald, starting to ask questions. And so anyway, she gives this interesting interview the other day with Dr. Drew. And Dr. Drew is a big deal. Like, he's mainstream. He's up there with like the Dr. Phils and Sanjay Guptas and everything else. This guy has like over 2 million followers on Twitter. And this chick actually basically says, look, I don't think I'm going to get the fourth booster. Like, straight up. I'm not going to get the fourth booster. I just paused it about 18 and a half minutes in. And before this, she's talking to Dr. Drew, like, still in recovery, really. And she's like, hey, is this normal? Like, I had gotten the booster like 3 weeks prior to this all going down. Is that normal? And Dr. Drew's like, yes, it is actually. From what I've seen, 2 to 3 weeks is when people tend to pass out and, experience all these different various side effects. It's actually something that I hear about quite a lot. My friend has been going through it, experiencing all kinds of side effects. And there's even like myocarditis and different heart issues. That's why I was asking you about that, Heather. And Heather's like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then she basically ends this is probably the most relevant part of the conversation, the 17 and 18 minute mark. She says, I don't think I'm going to get the fourth one. I think I'm done here. I think I'm done. And Dr. Drew is like, hey, yeah, you're probably right to do that. We just don't have the data to support that right now. So this for me is actually meaningful, because this is like normie breaking. I guarantee you there's a bunch of middle-aged white women just like Heather, and people not middle-aged white women who have just said, whatever government says, I will do. Right. And this is how she rationalizes her behavior. She's like, oh, I was doing shows and, they were getting mad at me. Don't they know I followed all the rules? I was first in line. I got all these injections. I did everything. As she says in her bit. And then she fractures her skull. And I don't know, maybe she has some memory loss. I have no idea what the long-term effects of this situation is. But I mean, imagine, this sort of slow motion train wreck continuing to occur. Right. You're 4 boosters in, you're 5, you're 6, you're 7, you're 8, these things are going to start adding up. And every single time it's almost like it seems like you're playing Russian roulette, with your life. Right. And I think this is the kind of story that I think, if this Dr. Drew story continues to make waves as it has kind of has been, this is the kind of thing that messes with people. And causes them to at least ask questions, because that's the biggest thing. When people just submissively, just accept information like without a second thought, man, that's the most dangerous situation to be in, right? And so this was an impactful one. And, I had to bring up this one aspect here. Bob Saget. So shout out to Teresa Bond, whoever she is, for bringing this up. She's like, yo, what about Bob Saget? And I started looking into this story a little bit from Daily Wire. So his autopsy report came back and nobody knows what really happened. So you may recall, like, this guy died not too long ago from blunt head trauma, that caused multiple skull fractures and hemorrhaging near his brain. And Sanjay Gupta is like, wait, this is a huge, like amount of damage to his skull. This is not like a normal blow. This was a very significant blow, right, to the head. And I can't help but think that there's always a possibility, right, that Bob Saget had a sort of a Heather situation. When you think about it, he's bigger, he's much taller, he weighs more, and depending on his environment and sort of how he fell and the kind of the circumstances around it, it seems entirely plausible that a similar situation happened for him, right? So here's the description, right? The skull fractures were extensive enough to stretch from the back of Saget's head around to his right temporal bone, right? And there were additional fractures on the front of his skull. So the ones in the front seem like I don't even know what to do on that one, because like the back of the head makes sense, maybe the right temporal too, but it's almost like he had like a compound fracture where the front and the back of his skull were damaged. Like how that happened, I don't know, but yeah, interesting connection there. Normie breaking. Moving this one to a tier A, and that's only because like Heather McDonald is not Dave Chappelle, like I didn't even know about her prior to this story. If she was like a bigger deal, I think it might even be S tier, but not a lot of folks know about this individual. More people know about Dr. Drew than know about this individual, I would say. So that really puts it into the A tier. But good to see normies asking questions. Pray they continue to. So next we have to talk about the Biden admin basically funding out the distribution of crack pipes. And this pisses me off to an exceptional degree as a Black American. Yeah, it's just painful to see. And they use the mask of equity, right? So here's the logic, right? Hey, white people, they can smoke crack and they're not getting infection because their crack pipes are like really in good shape. And so that's just racist. Like, why should white people be able to like smoke crack and like not get infections, but like Black people, like when they smoke it with these like not so good pipes, it can get like sores and infections and stuff. And so that's their rationale for spending like $30 million to help Black people, presumably, smoke crack. Yeah. And they want folks to not avoid an injection, to be fair as well, right? Because also these pipes, it's going to prevent them from getting needles in their body, which can cause different bad stuff to happen in terms of infections as well. So gosh, look guys, it's all for the greater good. This is against the law, right? So you can't distribute drug paraphernalia, including pipes. That's like against a lot of laws. But they did it anyway, or they were doing it anyway. And I want to take this a little bit from a sort of a different angle, because one thing that I remember hearing about not too long ago that kind of went under the radar. So you guys know that like in New York City, they're actually setting up, or they have like sanctioned places for crackheads to come and get high. Like they're called safe injection sites, and this has been destroying communities, driving business away. And this is all kind of in that same mentality of like, hey, let's be equitable, right? Let's make sure that it's not about restoration. It's not about curing anybody. It's not about having productive members of society. No. Let's find a problem within a problem, right? And then make that the focus, as opposed to thinking big picture and trying to really get to the root causes of these issues. And so anyway, you can bring in the substance that you prefer, right? And go ahead and just get high, right? And you can do, heroin, cocaine, crack, meth, other stuff. Just come right in, and we'll make it so that when you overdose, hey, what I'm saying, we got some medics on standby. We can, quickly call, the right professionals. Make sure, you don't pass away from an overdose, probably, most likely, maybe. So this is a thing in New York, and there's a second one here. Yeah, this is all De Blasio's doing, right? So he's and for some reason the Dems love this. They love first. That make no sense. So he's like, we want to be the first to have a legal shooting gallery for drug users in the U.S. Right? So we want to be the first. And how the Dems do it is they run these sort of experimental programs in places like New York and California, and then once they are satisfied with the outcome or the results, or they have some data, kind of the testing ground, that's when they make this federal, right? So it's easier to dismiss this story because $30 million is not that much money in the grand scheme of things, especially for the federal government. But what happens when it becomes $300 million? What happens when it becomes $3 billion? Right? That's your tax money. You and I's tax money that we've worked hard and paid to them to fund crackheads in the use of crack and drug users in the use of drugs. Pretty crazy. And there's one more data point on this one. It looks like the Republicans are trying to do something about this. So you have Lauren Boebert and her colleague basically coming up with, wait for it, the Hunter Act, halting the use of narcotics through effective recovery act. So obviously a dig at Joe Biden. Basically trying to stop this, right? They're trying to stop this sort of this waste of taxpayer money to fund crack habits, right? Instead of getting people off the drug altogether. And she says, never in my life would I thought I would have had to say this, but the proper role of government is not to fund the distribution of crack pipes. Did Hunter come up with this bullcrap? She says. That's a great question. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't, especially since the president's son is indeed a crackhead, and that is normal and mainstream. Moving this one to the A tier as well. I think it means a lot, particularly for the black community, because I think that's what it was viewed as being in the context of. Here you have Trump, who promised us the platinum plan. Had lots of bonuses. And here you have the Biden administration. And what have they done? They've given something like $500 million, right? Planned for illegal aliens, right? And at the same time, what have they done for the black community? Well, handed out some crack pipes. So there you go. So last thing we have to talk about today is I had to talk about this one. I don't like talking about this kind of stuff, but it's just too crazy not to discuss. So look, the Biden Nat Men, they hired a new Department of Energy senior official named Sam Brinton, and he's really deviant, like really deviant. I mean, we're talking. Where to start? So we have a drag queen who is into kink with people dressing up as animals, and then he entering into relations with said male animals. And as I was reading the story and trying to process it and say something intelligent, I couldn't help but think about that meme out there. It goes which way, Western man? Which way, Western man? Which way? How we have fallen. And the second thing that came to mind is this is not the Democratic Party of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is a deviant in of himself. That's a whole different story. But in the 90s, man, the Dems were not like this. Even under Obama, for example, Obama didn't really support gay marriage until the end of his first term or beginning of his second term. He was really not. He was trying to stop and not be kind of in support of it for half of his entire, let's say administration time, right? First 4 years until he came around to it. This wouldn't have even flown, I don't think, to the same degree during his administration, right? Given that sort of timidity. But under Biden, man, anything goes, right? And this goes on the sort of the heels of some other controversial picks. I wanted to really highlight two particularly egregious things here that I thought were really worth mentioning. So one is this guy is actually not just a official of the Department of Energy, but he's also a guy who's led some sessions on this very sort of deviant topics at the University of Nebraska. And so that's interesting because I couldn't help but be reminded of a couple of like similar stories, right? We have this sort of professor who was into sort of MAPs. He was actually called out on that last fall at Old Dominion, and was forced to resign, or I guess asked to resign. So this is Alan Walker. So in this case, they were like, nah, bridge too far, please resign. And then they're like more recently, these guys at SUNY Fredonia, he's out here talking about, hey, it's totally normal for, a grown man to enter into relations with a little girl, so long as the little girl says it's okay, right? The underage is totally fine. And he has not been fired yet, right? And people are asking for him to get fired, including the students, right? So this slippery slope thing is just crazy. A lot of this stuff seems to start in our universities. It kind of becomes academia, sort of like general thought, and then it slips into our other institutions, corporate, the government now, right? Through this Sam Brinton character being in government, this is really the let's say the unholy, altar. A lot of this stuff really starts in college. The next thing that I wanted to say is that there's actually he has this entire, let's see if I can find it. Yeah. So look, he's like, they believe it's abusive, that taking advantage of someone who may not be acting up to a level of human responsibility. The other perception is that I have some really messed up background. Basically, long story short is he's trying to defend diddling animals, guys. So, I mean, man, this kind of stuff is just absurdity, man. It feels like a I don't know, The Onion or Babylon Bee. It's just insane. I can't believe this is like normal for people now. I mean, we've come so far. This slippery slope that the left is on, like the what is it called? Overton window just continuously shifts to the left. And what was considered completely off limits, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, becomes normal now. So now this is the new standard. And look, guys, it's not just, by the way, I'm going to end it on this because I've said enough about this story that I don't want to talk about. I mean, look at this guy. Ugh. Man, we've fallen so far. The Republic is done, man. We're done. Anyway, so there was one more thing that I wanted to mention here, which is I think this section of this American Conservative article that covers this. You have to understand, this man is not, Sam Brinton, he is not passionate about energy. He's passionate about indoctrination. His mission in life is to make sure that you, me, and everybody else looks at him and his lifestyle and his behavior and says, that's totally fine. In fact, that should be encouraged. We should all engage in that activity, including, our children and teens and young adults. This is totally normal. That is his mission in life. Right. And I have some level of evidence for that. So he says on his website that he uses his nuclear background to gain access to senior corridors of power, to influence leaders to accept the full panoply, if I'm saying that rightly, right, of deviance. And then he says this, look, you might not expect a nuclear engineering graduate from MIT to be strolling around the White House in stilettos, but that's part of the reason Sam does it. Having a chat on preconceptions is right up their alley. Whether it's on technical topics or social issues like supporting LGBT survivors of conversion therapy, Sam is always willing to have the tough conversations with an open mind. I interpret this sort of like colorful, like positive language as, he's in here looking ridiculous, right? And then the goal is to make people triggered so that they engage him in a conversation and show and reveal their intolerance. So now he can go and report these individuals, right? These individuals who are in the Department of Energy under the Biden administration, and get them out of there, get them fired, get them to resign, right? Get them to pressure. I think that he is far more, passionate about his kink activity than he is about energy. I'm willing to put serious money on the table on that bet. And this very much reminds me of like what they're doing about like with the military, for example. So like, if you refuse to get the jab for whatever reason, or let's say You don't think, January 6th, deserves a death penalty. I'm just using a little exaggeration. Like they want those people gone, right? They want purity tests, right, for the society that they're looking to create. And they need to purge everybody who does not meet that purity test. And this is how they create their utopia. This is how they create their new society with the standards and norms and values that they hold dear. You have to deconstruct every traditional norm, every traditional value, right? And construct a new altar of woke. The only altar that matters is the altar of woke. And they will go to any measures to make sure that this gospel of woke is preached far and wide. And that's what this individual is really on a mission to do. If you question it, if you say this is weird, you say this shouldn't happen, you say, hold on a second. That's when they know, I gotcha. You're a bigot, right? You're a bigot. Our virtue is measured by the amount of ridiculousness we're willing to tolerate without saying a word, right? This one also deserves to move to the A tier. Thanks for listening to today's rundown. If you liked what you heard, please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.